Consider a par bond priced at 1,110 and has a modified duration of 4.562. In response to a 0.5% increase in yield to maturity, the price of the bond should most likely A, fall by approximately this amount, B, fall by approximately this amount, or C, rise by approximately this amount. So we can cross off rise right off the bat. Since our yield is increasing, we know that our price of our bond is going to be decreasing, and we're looking for a percentage increase or decrease, or a percentage decrease here. So we're not going to need to involve the par price of the bond. That information isn't needed. So this is our formula we're going to use. Price change is going to be equal to negative modified duration. So we're going to do negative 4.562 and then multiply that by our change in yield, which is positive 0.5%. And so 0.5% is 0.005 in decimal form, which is going to be equal to minus 0.0028. And then we're going to multiply that by 100 to get that in percentage terms. So that's going to be answer B, fall by approximately 2.281%. Payment in kind coupon bonds that allow the issuer to pay interest in the form of additional bonds rather than cash are most likely favorable for A, the issuer, B, the investor, or C, both the issuer and the investor. So who is this going to be most favorable for? So from the issuer standpoint, essentially what you're doing is you're getting cash in and you don't have any technically any cash flows going out until the end of the loan when you have to make this balloon payment essentially. So this is going to be very advantageous for the issuer because it's going to free up a lot more flexibility on cash flow, not having to make interest payments along the way. So it gives them more opportunity to put money back into the business and grow the business and then pay off at bond maturity. For the investor, the main advantage here is that you're going to be receiving likely a higher overall yield because this is very risky though. And so because of that riskiness, I would lean towards A, this being a lot better for the issuer. If you're getting no cash flows over time, there's a lot more risk that something bad could happen throughout the life cycle of that business, and then you may get little or nothing back in the end. Whereas if in a normal bond, if you're getting some cash flow over time, you're able to recoup your capital a little quicker. Answer A, a particularly risk-averse American investor wants your opinion on the bond market. All things being equal, which of these bonds would you most likely recommend a buy? A, Eurobonds. Eurobonds are going to be internationally issued, and so this American investor could buy bonds of a company in Germany, Poland, wherever else internationally. B, domestic bonds, meaning they're going to be buying US-based bonds, or C, emerging market bonds. So this investor is risk averse, so all things being equal, you'd likely recommend domestic bonds in this case, because one thing that Euro bonds are going to have relative to domestic bonds, even if these are in high quality, low chance of default countries, is that they're going to have some currency risk. So domestic bonds are not going to have that. The cash flows of that bond are going to be in US dollars for this American investor. And similarly, emerging market bonds are also going to have this currency risk and potentially just more credit risk due to them being emerging market countries and not developed countries. Answer B. Matrix pricing is most likely used for determining the price of new bonds, actively traded bonds, or 3 inactive bonds. So is this going to be 1 only, 1 and 3 only, or 1, 2, and 3? So we're going to be using matrix pricing when the bond doesn't have any recent market prices or information available. So if the bond is not traded very often. So that's going to rule out 2 right off the bat. Actively traded bonds are not going to need matrix pricing. You can just go look at the recent price that bond traded at to determine the pricing. You don't need to do matrix pricing to see what other bonds of different maturities and credit ratings are trading for. So this is going to be most helpful for new bonds in determining what the pricing of that new bond should be, since there may not, it obviously hasn't traded yet. So you would want to look at other similarly type of credit risk and maturity bonds to determine that pricing. And this would also apply to inactively traded bonds. So we're going to go with answer B here. this will be used for 1 and 3. Which of the following is least likely a primary benefit of securitization? So we've got least likely here. So 2 of these are going to be benefits of securitizing and 1 is not. A, an increase in the liquidity of the underlying financial assets. We can rule this out since this will be a benefit. Think about something like mortgage loans that might be more illiquid. When we take similar type mortgage loans and pool them into a securitized asset, it makes it more liquid because then we're able to trade them kind of as a pool rather than if we had to trade each of those mortgage loans individually. That would be a lot more tedious and the loans individually would have a lot less liquidity likely. B, an increase in credit rating from banks and other financial institutions. I would lean towards this being our answer. Securitization is not automatically going to increase the credit rating of the underlying assets. It could, depending on the different tranches and whatnot, and securitization does allow for risk transfer, but it's not going to be an automatic increase. So I think we would lean towards this not being a primary benefit. And then C, a reduction in funding costs for firms selling the financial assets to the securitizing entity. This is also going to be a benefit, allows them to kind of recoup some of those costs that came with funding the loans. And so we're going to go with answer B. Which of the following statements is or are most likely to be correct regarding derivatives? So we've got 3 statements here, 1, 2, and 3. And 1 and 3 are going to be correct, 2 and 3 are going to be correct, or 1, 2, and 3. So let's dig into these statements, see which ones are going to be accurate. 1, derivatives are similar to insurance in that both allow for the transfer of risk from one party to another. This is going to be a correct statement. For example, we can buy a put option. If we hold the underlying security and then we're buying that put option, that is a type of insurance, and we're transferring that downside risk that we had from us to the seller of that put option. 2, derivatives derive their performance from the performance of an underlying asset. That's also going to be correct, and it's right there in the name. The derivatives derive. They get their performance from the underlying. They're not going to diverge from what the underlying asset is doing. 3, the writer of an options contract is referred to as the short because he or she holds a short position. That's also going to be correct. If I sell the call or if I sell a put, I'm going to have the short position in that transaction. So 1, 2, and 3 are all correct, which is going to lead us right here to answer C. Stocks of Orange Corp are trading at $60, and the strike price of 6-month put options is $40. Given the price of the 6 months put option on Orange Corp is $2, and the risk-free rate is 8%, the price of the call option is closest to. So we're going to be using put-call parity to calculate this. And so a reminder on this formula, the call plus the under the bond, which is essentially this leg of the trade, which is going to be the strike price discounted back at the risk-free rate for the time period that we're looking at. And then that's going to be equal to the put plus the underlying. So we're given the put price here, and we're given the strike and the current price and the interest rate. We need to calculate the price of the call option. So we need to move this value over to this side, and then we'll be able to just plug in all the numbers and calculate. So we're going to have the put plus the underlying first. So our put is $2 given right here, and then adding to that the underlying, which is the current price of Orange Corp, $60. And then from there, we're going to subtract, since we move this variable over to the other side, we're going to subtract 40, which is our strike price. And then 40 is discounted back at 8% for 6 months. So 1.08 raised to the 0.5. And then when we work through that math, we get 23.51, which is going to be answer A. Which of the following is most likely true regarding call option replication strategy only? A, at option contract inception, borrow at a risk-free rate, and then utilize the proceeds to buy the underlying asset. This could be a call option replication strategy because we're going long the asset, which we also are under call options. And remember, call options do have some embedded leverage in them as derivatives. So it could be similar to borrowing money and then going long the underlying asset. So A sounds like a good answer so far. B, at contract inception, lend an amount equal to the option's exercise value at a risk-free rate and sell the underlying. This would not be for a call option because we would be going short by selling the underlying. We want to be long the underlying to have a call option replication. And C, the replication strategy requires adjustment over time depending on the likelihood of option exercise. This is going to be an accurate statement. However, the key here that makes A more correct than answer C is only. So what is true regarding call option replication strategy only? This would also be accurate for a put option replication strategy or different types of strategies. If we want to keep the same exposure, we're going to need to make adjustments over time. So that word only there is going to lead us to answer A being the better answer here. Which of the following is the least likely characteristic of exchange-traded derivatives markets? So least likely, meaning that two of these are going to be characteristics of exchange-traded derivatives markets and one will not, which is going to be our answer. So we've got A, transparency. We're going to rule that out since that will be a characteristic. The exchange-traded derivative markets are traded on exchanges, and so they're able to be seen by all market participants that have access to those exchanges, whereas something like OTC markets is going to be a little more exclusive and only available to certain institutional investors. B, lower degree of regulation and oversight. This is probably going to be our answer since they're going to have high degree of regulation and oversight. It's going to be regulated by multiple different agencies, and the lower degree of regulation is, again, that's going to go towards OTC, where there's going to be less participants, likely just institutional investors. And then C, standardization of contract terms and conditions. We're going to rule that out since that will be a characteristic. For example, option contracts are typically going to be based on 100 shares of stock. You couldn't buy an option contract for 150 or 120 or something more custom. It's going to just be in like 100 share blocks. So that leads us to answer B. Convenience yield most likely refers to the benefit of. So we've got three statements here, and then we need to determine which of these is correct. We've got 1 and 3 only, 2 only, or all three. So is it 1, holding an asset for sale? That would be part of the convenience yield. Convenience yield requires you to be holding the asset and then you're receiving some yield or income from holding that asset. 2, being able to take advantage of volatility in the market to sell high. That's also going to be a benefit. If we already hold the asset, a benefit of that is if prices spike, we can sell it at a higher price. 3, using the asset on demand if necessary. That's also going to be a benefit. If we're an oil producer, in that instance, what this is referring to is there's a convenience yield of us having oil on demand so that we can produce that into the end product and sell it. So that's going to lead us to answer C. All three of these are good.